all for coming out. It's quite a sacrifice to come out on a beautiful day like this. I'm very pleased. And I think we're going to have a good time. I talked to a few people who say they, can you hear me all right here? Who say they've got stories to share, and that would be great, and questions that we can all work on. I expect that some of you are here because you either knew or knew of my parents, Scott and Betty Hill, who came here in 1959, built a house on Lions Plain Road, and got immediately deeply involved in the life of the town. They just poured their hearts and all their energy into this town that they loved until the time they died. And some of you may know that Scott was very much involved with the Aspetuck Land Trust and the Weston Watershed, the Red Cross, the Common Council, and he was also president of the Weston Historical Society. And even when he was in his late 80s and early 90s, he was going around town, took upon himself the job of taking oral histories from the old folks in town with his tape recorder. And Betty was involved with the League of Women Voters and the WIL, that's the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And they were both extremely involved in the Northfield Congregational Church. And they felt that this was an ideal base from which to take responsibility for the town and even beyond, and the welfare of the town. And they were greatly loved in the church, and in the last number of years of my mother's life, when she was blind, they had a cadre of people from the church who regularly came and saw to a lot of her needs. And so she was very close to the town. As a matter of fact, she sort of felt that she was message central, sort of connecting everybody in town. From the couch in her living room, she sat there. She memorized almost everybody's telephone numbers and just kept everybody in touch. I'm here actually to talk about an earlier time when Scott and Betty and my brother Douglas and myself came to live here. And it was this period that inspired this book. And it came about after my mother's death. She died in 2001 at age 102. And the whole family was up cleaning out her attic. And what we found most of were many boxes filled with old family letters. And our family had the perhaps peculiar, sort of quaint habit of writing home to our parents when we left home. And we would write once a week typewritten letters back home, talking about what had happened during our last week. So what particularly interested me was finding the letters that Scott had written to his parents who were out in Reno, Nevada, where his father was a professor, and detailing, really chronicling everything that was happening during the 6 years that we lived here, from 39 to 1945, which were the exact years of World War II. So, this book came about because I took excerpts from all these letters that had to do both with our life, the family life here in Weston, and also bits and pieces from my father's work in New York. He was an engineer, electrical engineer for General Electric, and in the early years he was sent around troubleshooting in power plants. And then during the war, he was working with GE contracts with the Navy for various kinds of war work. That he kept saying, you know, I had a really fascinating day today, but I can't tell you anything about it until after the war. So, so how did we get to Weston in the first place? the family had been living in the suburb of New Jersey to be close to New York for commuting by ferry at that point. And it was a suburb that they began to see increasingly in the late 1930s was just not a healthy place to bring up children. It was very monolithically WASP, narrow-minded, and they were just increasingly uncomfortable. And so they began researching possible other places where they might move, still within commuting distance. And they were hearing about towns in the southern Connecticut coastal area. And so they got in their car and they drove up. The first place they went to was Westport. And my mother thought maybe she could get some important information at the post office. So she went in the post office in Westport and began talking to people in line. And she said, "Where can we find the best schools?" Everybody in line said, "Go to Weston." So they drove a little bit farther out, and they found this very, very rural town of 750 people, more or less, and primarily made up of farmers with deep roots in the land that went back generations, tradespeople, and a huge variety of artists, writers, musicians, craftspeople, dancers, entertainers, and so forth. It was a very interesting and diverse mix that they felt would be exactly right. And somehow they were put in touch with a possible house. And this was a very dilapidated house at the north end of Lions Plains Road, right at the juncture of Davis Hill, Valley Forge, and Kellogg Hill. And I'm sure you know the spot. And right next to the bridge, what they came to call the Troll Bridge, that rattled when you drove over it. And they found out that the house was owned by Ruth Fox, who was one of the daughters of Ella Treadwell, who lived in the house right across the street, and whose family went back many generations, the Treadwell family. And the Treadwells began telling them stories about the local lore. For instance, there was a hermit who lived in a cave under Bold Rock. This is the cliff that rose up right behind the Saugatuck River, which ran by this house that they were looking at. And they also heard about Fred Davis, the wild bearded man who lived in a shack across from the gorge on Valley Forge, and who dug graves in the Emmanuel Church Cemetery for a few dollars here and there, and scared the children to death. And so they talked to Ruth Fox, and she said she would be willing to rent them the house for $70 a month. And so we were thrilled to death and moved in September of 1939. And my brother and my brother was 5 and I was 11, and we began taking the school bus to Hurlbut at the school. And they had found that school, even though Weston at that time had no stores, no post office, nothing except this wonderful new school that had been built in 1934 to replace 7 one-room schoolhouses around town. And so I want to read you several passages from my book here that will give a flavor of what life was like and what we were coping with as the war came on and progressed here. February 1940, after a huge snowstorm, and a lot of these excerpts are very clipped. They're almost sound bites, because this is the way my father wrote, because he sat down every Sunday to write to his parents. After a huge snowstorm, had to put on chains to get the Ford out. I've learned to always carry chains, a shovel, and extra gas. Louise had her friend Barbara out from New Jersey, and for 2 days they taught boys, made up skits, skied on the Amherst Rock Hill, and climbed to the top of Bold Rock. Betty's been collecting 78 RPM classical records with coupons from the Saturday Evening Post, but we can't afford a record player yet. We've joined the Northfield Congregational Church across town, where a discussion group on war and peace has just started. March 1940. A sleet storm cut the power lines and Betty began cooking in our huge colonial fireplace. It's helpful to have the swinging crane to hold the pot over the flames and the Dutch oven to keep food warm. We've been hauling water from the river and lighting candles. After a week with still no power and the school closed because of no heat, Betty and the kids drove to Harrisburg to Betty's parents. I came home every night, built up the fire to keep the furnace going, and ate with friends who did have electricity. The damage from this storm has actually been worse than during the 1938 hurricane. September 1940. With an idea of building here at some point, we've been looking at some local land for sale. It's mostly $1,000 an acre, too high for us. One reason we'd left New Jersey was that it was over-involved with fixed ideas. Now we find a polarized situation here over town politics. There's currently a slate of 7 locals, excluding all New Yorkers and newcomers. So we're trying to get nonpartisan representation, including for the school board, a caucus system. The goats have learned to get out of everything. I should mention that one of the early obsessions I had when we moved here was that I wanted to raise goats. And finally, after much push-pull, my parents gave in and we began to have goats. So the goats have learned to get out of everything. I put in new posts and reinforced their fence with chicken wire. Louise says they watch how we open the gate and then copy us easily. They ate up the iris in the garden. October 1940. So we enter October, and there's still some of our known world left. A few months ago, we wondered. I suppose our likely source of trouble would be Japan next. If a few people really knew where Russia stands, then the picture would be clearer. Maybe Mr. Stalin wishes he himself knew. Probably he lives from day to day and hopes for the best. April 1941. We've been listening to the news of the move on Yugoslavia. Everyone here recognizes that we're as good as in war, except officially. Many think we will have a force over there in a year or two. Some think there is a very long war ahead. I doubt there will be any such force, and wouldn't be surprised to see the whole thing unravel rapidly, perhaps in a year. Last night we discussed the possibility of a few Allied victories in the Balkans, giving courage to the conquered to rise up. There's a lot of serious discussion of all of us in the office, going back to work Saturday mornings, perhaps all day Saturday, as is done in many factories and in our construction department. I'll be sorry to make the change, but this is not a time when we can consider personal desires. If we do, we will get nowhere. I suppose there never was a war with so many opinions floating around about it. I don't think much of the Lindbergh isolationist point of view. It was America first. October 1941. At a PTA meeting, FPA, that was Franklin Pierce Adams, perhaps you know the columnist, New York columnist, told the story of a visitor who came to Reading inquiring where he could find Mark Twain as to a shrine. The native said he'd lived there all his life and never heard of a Mr. Twain. The tourist described where he was supposed to live, how he looked, and that he was usually dressed in white. The native replied, "Oh, sure, you mean Sam Clemens. Looks like a lion." November 1941, Doug, that was my brother, reported going out with kids for Halloween. He was excited at how bad they'd been. Scaring a cook, ringing bells, throwing rotten apples at a car, and the driver got out, got mad and yelled that he'd throw the boys in jail. Doug just stood there and told him they don't throw little boys in jail, so he couldn't. When other kids came around, he was hanging out of his bedroom window trying to scare them, so he had a thoroughly good time. We picked up then Mike Brooks and his wife to take them to his talk at the school. Found them very pleasant. She's a lively, intelligent person who seems to be on guard all the time to protect her husband and to note how others take him. He's quiet, whimsical, a little plump with a gray mustache. He told the crowd that he was the world's worst speaker and promptly sat down, got out his books, and read to the audience for about an hour in his good Harvard accent. A few were disappointed that he just read, but most enjoyed the hour. I must buy at least one new tire and get another retreaded while there's still rubber. We let it go until the fabric showed. December 14th, 1941. The radio seems to have found its stride in this war reporting until Roosevelt Talk. We had all sorts of wild reports and commentators orating all through the House if we let them. Things have moved fast and with little or no opposition. At the moment, it sounds as favorable as can be expected. Apparently, San Francisco had lots of excitement, or at least alarms. Tuesday, we were getting rumors thick and fast. In the elevator, this is in New York, I heard the girls talking. Germany declared war on us. Enemy planes are an hour away, or a mile away. As we returned from lunch, 2 fire departments near us rolled out and started their sirens. In a few minutes, they blew again, supposed to indicate the all clear. An hour later, it all started over again, though the sky was perfectly clear. We all went on working and disregarded the fuss. However, I did sit down to set up an emergency call system for disasters so that if one occurs, we can reach out to 100 men, phones or not. We can reach out. The next morning there was another alarm as I came into the office, but no one even listened this time. We do rather expect a few bombs just for good measure sometimes. I can think of a few places I hope they don't hit, the utility services and so forth. Generally, I'd say that everyone is calm and collected. No one was surprised, though, a little disturbed when 2 British battleships were lost at the same time, a real blow. A doctor told Betty and Weston that lots of people had been coming to her in a state of nerves. There was feverish activity for a few days by the air raid wardens in New York to find out what they should be doing, but now they know and have settled back. Our office stays in the corridor on the 20th floor, ours, and one person stands at the setback roof to take out incendiaries, put out incendiaries. I've taken to carrying a pocket flashlight. Such are my preparations for participating in the latest war. May 1942. On calling around about starting up a bus line, we found that it will cost $8 per month to ride the commuter bus if it goes through. The school bus would be used, making an earlier run to the Westport station. Now I pay $23 on the railroad, so it would total over $30 a month to get to New York. Life would be simpler in a place like Reno, where I could walk to work like you, Father, and have more time at home. So far, though, we're surviving and are getting by with our ration of gas. General gas rationing across the country, this is June 42, across the country is due to start July 15th. Friday to the Coopers for dinner. Leo and Frankie Godofsky arrived on their new scooter. It's like a motorcycle with a small sidecar, except with very small rubber-tired wheels. You sit on the engine, the car is only a tin box. However, it works, and it must have waked up all the neighbors when we broke up after midnight. We're changing our church hour to 10:30 and holding Sunday school at the same time to conserve tires and driving. Saturday I saw flocks of fortresses, etc., over the parade in New York. Then that night, pursuit planes flew circles over us in Weston while we were sitting here in the garden before dinner. As to our vacation, we're staying here because of tires and gas, and also the expense of hotels if we were to go away. It's very pleasant here. We were invited to an estate over near Pleasantville in Westchester, but due to gas, we declined. There's no gas left anywhere around the New York area, and won't be until July 1st quotas can be used. By luck, I got 6 gallons Saturday after stopping at 6 stations, all dry. Most of them just closed up and the employees went home. You can't even get air. July 1st, the commuter bus starts. It will start at our corner. We sealed the deal with Ruth Fox and bought the approximately 2-acre field next door for $1,500 cash. Are you listening? See here, Peter and Barbara Blau, who bought my family's house on Lions Plain just a few months ago, and are doing a fabulous job in renovating it. We're just delighted. July 1942. Thursday I explored the woods and swamps west of our nearby hills. Had a fine time with compass and paper trying to map it. Went in at the Reiner's Brook, and after an hour of following old lumber trails, that was Fritz Reiner, following old lumber trails and roads, keeping track of turns, came out into civilization and got located on the map. Then back in, and after 20 minutes arrived again on a road and knew where I was. I traveled about 8 miles in absolute wilderness, no human habitat in evidence. Put up a few markers for the future. We have about 100 feet of beans, all we can possibly eat and many to give away. We got in the hay with all the neighborhood children working, and so it went fast. I have about 3/4 of a ton of good clover, and the barn smells very sweet. September 1942. Nelson Sprackling, a noted musician here, wanted to help the war effort and is now working at a factory 66 hours a week on a night shift making machine guns. Doug asked me, what would you be if you were in the war? I said I'd try for officer. He was startled and said, what? Yes, I replied. He thought a long time and then, how many people do you have to kill to be an officer? December 1942. We've had a fairly mild winter so far, fortunately for those burning oil. We keep some rooms shut off to save our coal, but today the house is 55 degrees because of strong winds and 0 temperatures. Most people are keeping their houses at 60. At the moment, 60 would feel warm. Betty found that it was 40 on the kitchen floor and apples were freezing. The goats are shivering. They've grown woolly coats that stand out straight. Betty's been using powdered milk for making ice cream, soups, cocoa, Poston, etc. Tastes good. She found a pound of butter, and I got 2 tons of coal, so we're set for a while. Butter and meat are very scarce. May 1943. I was in town, that's New York, Wednesday night to speak on electronics. I was within 5 minutes of the end of my talk when the air raid sirens blew. We blacked out the room as the curtains weren't tight enough and we were on top of a high building. So I had to fill in and talked and answered and asked questions for another hour. Peculiar feeling speaking to men you can't see. At 10 o'clock, the all clear siren sounded, the lights came on, and we wrapped it up. June 1943. Had the Howard Smiths for dinner, eating 2 of the Thorpe's rabbits. At 10:45, I got a call about an air raid alert, so we said goodbye in a hurry and rushed the guests out to make a run for home down Davis Hill Road. I had to patrol the road as usual. It was still on after 12 o'clock, so I quit and came to bed, just as the all clear sounded. A lot of monkey business once we all know what to do. November 1943. Friday I got home to great wailing. It seems the Thorpes gave Betty some red points. These were ration coupons for meats, butter, fat, oil, and cheese. And knowing she'd have a house full, she bought a fine 6-pound roast for $4.72. Put it on the back porch to cool for an hour, then heard a commotion and rushed out in the dark to find a dog making off with the whole thing. Never could find it, so we were without meat for a week. In January 1945, there was a bombshell. My father got word that he was suddenly being transferred out of New York to Buffalo. So in April of 1945, we had to move in a hurry. We almost couldn't find any, there were no houses for rent anywhere in the Buffalo area. Finally, they arranged for an exchange with a house we were living in on Lions Plain, and so we were there for a year. Now I'm just going to add a few of the recollections that both my brother and I came up with after I'd written this. And this is Doug, and you have to remember he was only 5 when we moved there, so he says his memories are a little sketchy. On gas rationing, a trip to Campo Beach in Westport on Long Island Sound was a big deal. I remember Mom used precious gas coupons to drive the 1941 Pontiac with 6 of my buds, 2 on each running board, 2 in the car, and a lot of whooping and hollering as we roared down Lions Plain Road. We got extra coupons because Mom was taking graduate courses in Danbury. Patriots. A short time after Pearl Harbor, Dad and Joe Leopold, unbeknownst to their wives, went to Westport to volunteer for the military. They were turned away because they were too old. They were in their mid-30s. Near the ski hill on FPA's land, that's Frank Adams, I witnessed maneuvers of Connecticut National Guardsmen, rifles bristling in the noonday sun, scurrying from bush to bush, a whistle blown to signal the end of an exercise. And on food, he said, many Westonites grew victory gardens. Canning was a big deal. We were the only ones in town with a dehydrator. I remember the smell of the machine in action and how Mom sealed and labeled each output in waxed paper. Remember, this was before plastic. All the veggies except carrots tasted like cardboard. Mom would send us out to the woods to harvest fiddleheads and dandelions because we were at war. We managed to eat them only if they were dressed with bacon and vinegar. Families contributed time and resources to start a hot lunch program at Hurlbut School. Mom often delivered food and worked in the school kitchen, which buzzed during summers when all the mothers in town were urged to bring vegetables from their gardens to freeze and can. For 5 cents, pupils could get a meal of chicken, dumplings, a vegetable, and a dessert. A government subsidy provided milk. And local war efforts, gathering milkweed pods on Blueberry Hill for Air Force life jackets. And here are a few things that I wrote. Connection to the land. I loved the wilderness quality in Weston, the great natural beauty of open, wild spaces at that time. The ability to ride off on my bicycle, to sit on a rock at the edge of the reservoir and watch the sun setting over pristine hills, or to get lost in dense woods, or to sit scribbling poems in solitary bliss on a gnarled route, cantilevered over the swirling Saugatuck River at the bottom of our field. Skating up the frozen river during the rare winters when it was cold enough to freeze, beneath dark, overhanging hemlock boughs, I felt like a mythic Nordic ice maiden. Many adolescent girls develop a passion for horses. Mine, though, was goats. I remember promising the powers that be that I'd stop any number of nasty habits if only my parents would let me raise goats. When they relented, partly because it was a patriotic thing to do in wartime, produce your own food, and also because they knew it would improve my sense of responsibility and self-reliance, I was in heaven. There were tough times, especially on frigid winter pre-dawn mornings when I had to go to the barn in the dark to muck out the stall and milk Bonnie. Here was my typical routine. At 6 a.m. and a sharp wind is whipping away the last stars. The thermometer reads -15. In the light from the faint pallor in the east, I slip around crazily on rough ice, balancing my bucket of hot water. I could just make out the goat barn ahead. Once inside, in the comparative stillness, I pause to listen to the gentle creaking of the rafters. Scattered hay seeds are swirling on the floor, blown up by the wind from beneath wide cracks in the boards. Teetering on a plank high up that forms a crude hayloft, I toss down large armfuls of musty clover and alfalfa, releasing clouds of choking dust. Inside the goat stall, Bonnie and Bambi lie huddled together, shivering slightly. Bonnie complains of the unusually bitter cold with little questioning bleats and lurches to her feet. She paws the platform impatiently. Bambi struggles up too and thrusts her head into the feed trough and butts her empty pan in anticipation. With Bonnie on the milking stand, I lean into her furry flank, ready to grab her leg in case she decides to stick it in the milk bucket. She's producing well, and I lug the warm pail into the kitchen, weigh the milk, strain it through cheesecloth, and record the amount. Next, carrying water and hay, I escort the goats down to the lower barn, the goat house, where they'll spend the day. After forking out the dirty hay and sweeping the night stall, I must hustle to get ready for school. In warm weather, I hike out to the dewy field and pound in stakes to tether the goats for the day. Frequently, we have to chase them when they escape from their smaller fenced corral and get into the neighbors' gardens, or worse, nibble poisonous laurel or hellebore leaves. For 5 years, I was a happy goat herd, running my own small business, selling milk to my family and a couple of neighbors with special medical needs. I also served as midwife a number of times and was round-the-clock nurse when Bonnie was mauled by the neighbor's dogs. Mostly, I just loved my goat people. When gas rationing came on, Mother had to bite the bullet and get on a bicycle for the first time. I still have visions of her wobbling back and forth up Lions Plain, always wearing a skirt or dress, determined to learn in order to serve as an air raid warden. The only one in the family with the stomach to slaughter the chickens was Mother. This was supposed to be Doug's job, and he would spend inordinate amounts of time sharpening his axe and setting up the stump, delaying the moment of execution. If he couldn't bring himself to the task, and neither my father nor I could stand to be in the vicinity, my mother would coolly step in, and soon a hapless, headless fowl was careening around the yard, spraying blood. Then both Doug and I were expected to pitch in, pluck, and then burn off the pin feathers. That smell lingers still in my memory. In summertime, there'd often be a call from Peggy Moore or Lillian Villarmy or Leota Hall, all from down Lions Plain, saying the wild strawberries or blueberries were ripe. Did we want to come along on a picking expedition? We'd drop everything, grab our buckets, and tramp up to the brambly woods off 11 o'clock road or Kellogg Hill, anticipating a fine pie that night. Symphony conductor Fritz Reiner, who lived a half mile up Davis Hill Road, occasionally rode the commuter bus into New York. His chauffeur would drive him down to wait at the bus stop in front of our house. One time, hearing me practicing cello, he was curious. He came to the door and sat down to chat about my musical ambitions. I found him friendly and encouraging. Also on the subject of my cello and the commuter bus, one day I was riding the bus and noticed that Helen Keller and her companion Polly were also aboard. Gathering my courage, I fell into conversation with her through the companion. We got to talking about my cello playing. Miss Keller brightened, saying this was her favorite instrument. She perceived it like wind in the pines. I'll just wrap up with how I ended the book here. As terrible as the war years were, and despite the myriad inconveniences, the fact that they were tinged with the flavor of the often surreal, idyllic life we had built in that precise time span, 1939 to 1945, made our sojourn in Weston an almost magical time in my memory. No doubt part of this was because everyone in town and in the country drew closer together, both because sharing was necessary and because everyone was united behind the massive threats of a brutal war. A sense of community developed that was considerably stronger at that time than in our more politically fragmented life now. My memories are rich with many subsequent visits to my parents' home after 1959 with my husband and 2 sons and their families. Yet it was that earlier time in Weston, exactly bracketing the war years, that holds special significance. That encapsulated period, that life, has for me ballooned to almost mythic proportions. Of course there were hardships. We scraped along with limited food, fuel, tires, shoes, stockings, meat, sugar, butter, and much more, often with unpleasant substitutes. We had to bike or walk when we could no longer drive our cars. Clearly there was terrible anxiety in families with servicemen who died in great numbers. There were 3 out of 4 older brothers of a high school classmate who were killed. I was fortunate to be just under the age when my contemporaries might be drafted, but there was a sense that this was a just, good war. There was enthusiasm and strong patriotism when we entered the conflict in 1941. It was a time for heroism. For me, there was a romantic aura about the era. All America was united in a singular purpose. We put our military in their uniforms on a pedestal. They were going to save Europe, defeat Hitler, then Japan. There was a righteousness, even a fierce joy, about living with the sacrifices and hardships. We reveled in our victory gardens and volunteered for defense work, supporting the troops, entertaining them, rolling bandages, darkening our windows with blankets and spotting planes. The petty kinds of concern, small crimes and misbehaviors, seemed to melt away or recede significantly in the face of our collective talk. These were memories to cherish. Thank you. Now I'd love to just throw this open for other people to share any memories from that time or connections or whatever you'd like to talk about. Yes.
I was looking through your book yesterday, and the sense of what was lost was looking at the pictures of the swimming hole, which used to be Cartridge, where that house is. There.
No, this was the one right next to the bridge on Davis Hill Road.
On Davis Hill Road, okay. But that kind of thing, we live in such a litigious society now that people can't have swimming pools anymore because, God forbid, something happens, they'll get sued.
That's right.
And the same thing about the pond that is on Steep Hill. It's still there, but everybody used to ice skate on that.
I know, we played hockey on that.
And evidently people used to give them their ice skates when they grew up, so there were always enough ice skates so everybody could find something that more or less fit them. And that's all really kind of lost. Even the walk down Lions Plain to the school bus. Kids now, you know, if the school bus leaves them half a mile away, that's unacceptable. They have to take them right to their driveway and then where they're met by their parents.
Is that a fear of something happening to them? Or is this just the helicoptering?
Well, it's a fear. Something might happen, but Carl, my husband here, used to walk from, we live on 11 o'clock road, all the way down to Lions Plain every day for that school bus, which was miles down and miles up.
Right.
And nobody worried, you know, the 8-year-old might not return.
Right. The swimming hole in back of our, we call it the Mansbridge house, the house right on the corner where we lived in 1939. And that was a wonderful swimming hole. It was the community swimming hole. And there was a huge sycamore tree with a rope hanging down, and you'd swing out and drop, and everybody in the neighborhood, and even some of the neighbors would bring their friends from New York. We might have 50 people it's swimming in our river, and nobody thought about, liability or anything like that. Yes, Carl?
Betty, can I just come up? And first I want to attest to the literal truth of everything you've heard today. I was a classmate at Roosevelt School with Betty, as we then called her.
Lisa.
With Lisa.
I was Louise then.
Louise, excuse me, dear. Senior moment. But I wanted to show you something. We were in the same graduating class, and this is the graduating exercise for the Roosevelt School, dated June 9th, 1942, and covered by yours truly. And then if you look inside, there is an entrance for Louise Hill. And I have to read you what it says. Louise Hill, nicknamed Teddy.
By my father.
Oh, okay. Ambition, be a writer, travel abroad. Both fully realized.
Right. My husband and I lived abroad for most of 10 years.
I can't read my writing, but it says baseball 2, basketball 1. That must be your athletic record. Not my writing, it's the Xerox, not Xerox, mimeograph machine. Favorite radio programs. I Love a Mystery. John Froder. What is John Froder? I wonder what that is. But I Love a Mystery. I remember I Love a Mystery too. Anyway, I read all of this, and everything that was said today is true, and I share the sense of loss also that you talk about. And I wish that there were more appropriate ways that we could all recollect that period.
That period when it was very precious, wasn't it?
It was very precious.
We were there for each other.
And I just urge you, if you can, to get Lisa still, who's Louise before, but Lisa now. Lisa's a book, which is excellent, and it has wonderful pictures in it, too. I have some photographs too I have to show you later, too. Okay.
Thank you, Carl.
Okay.
And are there any other, as Carl would say, not fossils, survivors from that period? Yes.
Young timers.
Young timers, yeah.
Yeah, from that period. But when we moved here, one of the first stories I heard about your parents, this isn't about wartime or anything, but it's just, they were kind of extraordinary characters, I think. And the first story that we heard was they were planning a trip, I think, like to the Himalayas or something, and they spent like 3 weeks in a tent in the cold out back of their house getting acclimated.
Really?
That was how they prepared.
I don't remember
for the
hearing
trip.
about that. That sounds typical, though.
Yeah. And then once we were at a party, and your mother was in a beautiful red dress, and Scott said, somebody complimented her on her dress, and he said, Betty made that dress. He said, and when Betty sews, everything stops.
She made all her clothes, all my clothes.
Amazing. Yes.
Saved bits of antique lace to always have some sort of unusual ornament. Right. Anybody else have anything?
One more thing.
Yes.
When your mother was in the house by herself, where you live now, I believe, apparently there was somebody broke in next door. This was quite a while back, but anyway, she apparently heard it, and then they came to break into her house, and she heard them like either smash a window or something, and she just yelled, "Get out!" And they did. They ran away. And so the next day she said, "It was my time. It was my time." But it wasn't.
Right, I remember that. That was when she was pretty blind, too.
Yeah,
She was
yeah,
blind
just,
the last 10 years of her life, and,
yeah.
and a good part of that time she lived alone, cooking, entertaining, went right on. Yes.
We used to see her years ago, and we can't go to that fair anymore, but the Emmanuel Church Fair used to have a dinner at night, and all the,
All the old timers.
all the old timers used to go. Now they're all gone, and it's no longer the same. But that we can count on seeing them once a year at the Emmanuel Church Fair, at the dinner.
Right, I remember that. Yesterday afternoon, just before the rain, I went walking through the Emmanuel Cemetery, and people there were people that we had known, that I had known. They were all familiar names.
And you recall in your memorandum something in your memoir, something that I recall so well too. In fact, I was part of the band that Judy Hall had the Hillbilly Band, and we used to square dance. And that was our introduction to what we would call social mixing now. And it was all in the basement of the...
Right, oh, that was a huge deal, right. Square dances, I don't know if they're still big around here or not, but the highlight of the evening of doing very rigorous square dancing, and you learn how to just swing, exactly right.
And then Birdie in the Cage.
I was just going to say, the last dance was Birdie in the Cage. You were very careful about who your partner was, because it's one couple at a time swings in the middle of the square, and they kiss at the end. So it was really, really big deal.
And the other part of let Lisa here. Make two quick comments. I found these letters fascinating, and toward the end of last year of the war, the first time I heard about this was from a letter, because Scott Hill never mentioned this, but he got directly involved in nuclear energy. And he had had contact apparently with Fermi, and General Electric got very much involved in the whole thing, dealing with bombs. We never heard anything at all about that from Scott until I read that letter. I found.
Yeah, I only heard a couple of years ago.
So I found that fascinating. The second thing, in reading the letters, and anybody who has a chance to do it, I think you'll really enjoy it, was I can't imagine our new generation today doing that. I can't imagine the people, 11-year-old like Lisa, and all of us who, of that period, who used to write letters to record what was going on in our life. We don't do that anymore. Now we have computers, now we have
email and all that history.
Email, Facebook, and all that. And the electronic age has taken over. And the time when we have a chance to record, I can't imagine it's being difficult X number of years today when somebody wants to write about the wars we're in today, of having that kind of detail of what actually people were thinking about, which is kind of sad that our history now has kind of moved on to another era.
We need people like Carl and Shireen to research these things.
Well, can I add a footnote to all of this? Looking through this graduation book, I see Jack and Jill Held.
Yes.
Jack's nickname was Romeo, and Jill's was Holdy, Heldy. Jack and Jill were a wonderful couple, a wonderful pair in our class, and they were the adopted children of John Held Jr., who was the artist who did the logo for the library that you see.
It's a sign.
The logo sign.
That's our logo too.
On 57 and 53, there's a little sign. And he was a New Yorker cartoonist.
Right.
And yeah, they were twins, Jack.
They were twins, and they, I think Jack volunteered for the military as soon as he got out of 8th grade. I forget how that happened. But several of our classmates did. And I'm not sure they ended up very well. But anyway, no, they were fine.
I remember when. I remember when. I could go below the dam, take a canoe, go down the river, all along the river, all along the river, all along the river, until you came to the Sound. I remember when. And I remember when everybody along that river put rocks in there to make a swimming pool for themselves. So what the hell have we got in there? It's like somebody pissing at the end. I remember when. The other thing is, if you don't like it here, move. Anybody want to buy a house in Weston?
It We were here before the dam was built. We were there watching the construction. We
Where the
saw
town was. Remember where the town was?
Yes, I remember some of those houses, and even after the water, they let the water in, there were little bits of those houses poking up.
You know, there's a book written called The Valley of the Damned about just that project.
Really?
Tell a little bit about the Godowskis, because that's such an interesting family. And they lived on 136, right in that house you can hardly see.
Right. Well, Leo Godowski was a superb violinist. I think he played at the White House several times. He was also the inventor of Kodachrome. And his wife, Frankie, was Frances Gershwin, George Gershwin's sister. And we used to go up there for chamber music concerts, and the minister then, Clyde Holbrook, the minister of Northfield Church, who was my cello teacher, was a very fine cellist, and he was invited up there often to play string quartets. And I think early in the war, my parents would go up there, and dinner would be served by the butler. And, 4-course meals, fine wines with every course. Toward the end of the war, all the servants had left and gone off to war jobs, and Frankie and Leo were doing all their own work, and as I said here, tooling around in their little scooter thing, tin can. Yeah, they were great. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Very much. As Lisa mentioned, Lisa's book for sale out in the vestibule. If anyone's interested, I can bring that up for you.
And if they run out, you can